The rope creaks before you even see her. You smell smoke first, thick, bitter, clinging to the back of your throat. The square is crowded, not loud, not chaotic, just waiting. Boots scrape against cobblestone, a child coughs. Somewhere metal rattles, chains brushing against wood. You stand among them, you don't move. Because in the center of the square, beneath a gray and merciless sky, she stands on a raised platform. Her wrists are bound, her hair hangs loose, tangled by the wind, her lips move but you cannot hear what she is saying. Maybe she's praying, maybe she's pleading, maybe she's already accepted what you haven't. A man in dark robes steps forward, deliberate, ceremonial, authority stitched into every fold of fabric. He unrolls a parchment. The crowd leans in, hungry for righteousness. The executioner adjusts the rope. You hear the fibers stretch. You hear the wood groan beneath her weight as she shifts. You hear your own heartbeat. And then the question slices through the silence. Her crime. The parchment flutters, the official clears his throat. You expect murder, treason, betrayal of the crown. Instead, the charge is smaller, softer, almost laughable. She spoke too loudly in public. She refused a marriage. She was accused, only accused, of being unruly. A whisper became a rumor became a charge became a sentence. The crowd nods as if justice has been served, but you feel it, don't you? This isn't justice, this is control. The rope tightens, the smoke thickens, and as the authority figure raises his hand to signal the end, you realize something colder than the morning air. This execution was never about what she did, it was about what she represented. And this is only the beginning. The rope tightens, and in that suspended breath between accusation and execution, a question begins to echo, not from the crowd, not from the officials, but from somewhere deeper, from history itself. Why were women punished differently? Why did the law sharpen itself more violently against their voices, their bodies, their choices? You watch her feet leave the wooden platform, the crowd exhales, some avert their eyes, others stare as if witnessing a necessary ritual, justice they call it. But is it justice, or is it obedience dressed in the costume of law? Across centuries, across empires carved in stone and kingdoms built on scripture, punishment for women was rarely just about crime. It was about visibility, it was about silence. It was about reminding every other woman in the crowd exactly where she stood. In ancient marketplaces, women accused of adultery were paraded through streets before punishment was delivered, beneath the sun, beneath the eyes of neighbors who would carry the image home like a warning. In medieval towns, iron contraptions were locked around female heads to stop excessive speech, the metal biting into the tongue each time it dared to move. In certain courts, a man's violence could be fined, but a woman's defiance could be mutilated. These were not isolated acts of cruelty. They were systems that marked the female body as both spectacle and symbol. The punishments were often theatrical, public, deliberate, unforgettable, because the goal was never only to discipline one woman, it was to instruct all of them. From ancient legal codes carved into stone tablets, to religious tribunals fueled by fear, to regimes that shaved heads and branded shame into flesh, the pattern repeats. Different languages, different gods, different laws, the same message, know your place. So as you stand there watching the rope sway in the morning wind, ask yourself, was she punished for what she did, or for what she represented? In this episode, we will move across centuries and continents. We will examine documented cases, not myths, not exaggerations, but recorded punishments written into legal codes, court transcripts, and eyewitness accounts. We will step into public squares, into interrogation chambers, into courtrooms where verdicts were handed down long before the accused were allowed to speak. And as we do, you may begin to notice something unsettling. The cruelty was rarely random, it was structured, calculated, symbolic. If you believe history should not be softened, if you believe the darkest chapters deserve light rather than silence, then subscribe to the darkest punishments in history. Because these stories were designed to intimidate, and remembering them is the only way they lose that power. And if you choose not to subscribe, tell us why. Tell us in the comments why stories like hers should fade quietly into the past. Now let's step further back in time to where punishment first became performance, public humiliation and orchestrated control. Now step into a narrow medieval street. The air is damp. The stones beneath your feet are slick with rain and refuse, windows crack open above you, faces appear curious, cautious, expectant. In the center of the square, a woman is being fitted with iron, not armor, not protection, punishment. The device is cold and deliberate, a metal cage that locks around her head. A curved plate presses down on her tongue. Spikes wait behind the metal, ready to pierce flesh if she dares to speak. They call it the scold's bridle. Invented in England and Scotland, it was reserved mostly for women accused of excessive speech, gossip, defiance, or simply being difficult. No blood is spilled, no execution carried out. And yet the cruelty is intimate. The iron tightens, her lips cannot close, her tongue cannot move, every word becomes pain. You hear the key turn, the crowd begins to walk. Punishment here is not private, it is a procession. She is paraded through town like a warning sign. This is not correction, this is humiliation. Now move to the riverbank. The sky is gray again. A wooden chair is mounted at the end of a long beam. They strap her in, wrists bound, skirts heavy with water even before she touches it. They accuse her of being disorderly, of arguing, of disturbing the peace. The beam tilts, the river swallows her whole. This is the ducking stool ritual, drowning without death, intended to cleanse her temper, to wash away disobedience. The punishment is theatrical, rhythmic, public. Now look closer at her hair. In other towns, humiliation took a sharper edge. Her head is shaved in front of neighbors. Long strands fall to the ground like stripped identity. In some places this was done to women accused of adultery, in others to those suspected of consorting with the enemy. Hair, a symbol of femininity, beauty, dignity, reduced to a pile of severed threads. The act is surgical in its symbolism, not death but degradation. In certain regions, branding irons were heated until they glowed. Marks were pressed into skin, letters burned onto flesh to signal adultery, immorality. Disgrace, a permanent sentence carved into the body. You begin to see the pattern: the mouth restrained, the body submerged, the hair removed, the skin marked. Voice, sexuality, reputation. These punishments did not simply penalize behavior, they targeted identity. They attacked the parts of a woman that society feared could disrupt order. And always there was an audience, because spectacle multiplies power. When humiliation becomes public, it becomes contagious. Every woman watching learns the lesson without needing to feel the iron herself. Control does not require constant violence, it requires visible consequences. If you believe history should never be sanitized, subscribe to the darkest punishments in history. And if you choose not to subscribe, explain in the comments why these stories deserve to be forgotten. Fear becomes law. And when humiliation was no longer enough, fear took its place. You are no longer standing in a muddy town square. You are inside a courtroom thick with incense and suspicion. Candles flicker against stone walls. A woman kneels at the center, wrists bound, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. They are not calling her disorderly now, they are calling her a witch. The accusation moves faster than reason. A cow died, a child fell ill, a storm destroyed the crops, someone must be responsible. The crowd does not need proof, it needs relief. In early modern Europe, thousands of women were accused under the charge of witchcraft. In some regions, the vast majority of the condemned were female. Widows, healers, midwives, women who lived alone, women who spoke differently, women who were simply inconvenient. Fear became evidence, and fear is persuasive. You hear the questions. Did you consort with the devil? Did you curse your neighbor? Did you attend the Sabbath? She denies it. The denial is written down not as innocence but as resistance. Resistance justifies escalation. The instruments are brought forward, ropes are tightened around wrists and ankles. The strappado lifts her off the ground, shoulders straining, joints tearing under her own weight. Iron boots compress bone, needles search for witches' marks on her skin, sleep is denied for days, food withheld, isolation imposed. Confession becomes a doorway, and torture becomes the key. The confession is not meant to uncover truth, it is meant to confirm fear. Under enough pain, anyone will speak. Names are given, neighbors implicated, panic spreads outward like fire in dry timber. And fire is precisely how some of these trials end. You stand again in a public square, wood is stacked high, she is tied to a stake, flames begin at her feet, Smoke coils upward, carrying prayers and screams together. Burning, hanging, pressing, methods sanctified by belief. When morality merges with fear, punishment transforms into purification. They were not simply executing women. They believed they were cleansing the community, eliminating evil, restoring divine order. The law spoke in the language of salvation. The crowd whispered in the language of terror, and terror is efficient. When one woman burns, 100 others fall silent. When one confession is extracted, suspicion multiplies. Fear becomes a legal weapon, invisible, contagious, self-sustaining. Ask yourself, if a society truly believes it is saving itself, how far will it go? If confronting these chapters of history makes you uncomfortable, that discomfort matters. Subscribe to the darkest punishments in history so these stories remain visible, unfiltered, and unforgotten. And if you decide not to subscribe, tell us why in the comments. Tell us why fear dressed as morality should be easier to remember than the women who suffered under it. Now we move from the fires of hysteria to the cold precision of law. Legalized bodily punishment. The scene shifts, no longer the chaotic hysteria of a courtroom or the crackling flames of a public square. You are now in the quiet shadow of an ancient city where law and custom merge into ritualized cruelty. Here, punishment is not haphazard, it is codified, deliberate, sanctioned. Every strike, every cut, every mark is preordained. Adultery, a word heavy with accusation, judgment, and societal fear. In many ancient civilizations, it was not merely a moral failing, it was a transgression against family, property, and order. The woman accused is brought forth. Her hands are empty, yet they carry centuries of inherited control over her body. Stone, hard, unyielding. The sentence is public stoning. The crowd gathers not to seek justice but to witness confirmation of law. Each stone thrown is a punctuation, a collective assertion that her body belongs not to her but to society's gaze. Blood and dust mingle. Her cries are absorbed by ritual. By the time she falls, the lesson has been delivered. In other regions, the punishment is even more intimate, more permanent. A knife, a sharp edge, and the nose is cut. Facial mutilation marks her identity as a criminal for life. The act is clinical, systematic. She leaves the space not only punished but branded, an eternal reminder of societal control. South Asia, Middle East, and parts of the Mediterranean, the practices vary, but the principle is uniform. The female body as property, as a vessel of transgression, as a canvas upon which punishment is written in flesh. Under Roman law, patria potestas granted men unprecedented domestic authority. Fathers, husbands, masters, they could command obedience through physical discipline. A strike to the body, a scar upon the skin, a public shamming, all served as instruments of control. The woman's autonomy is not considered, her punishment is a reinforcement of hierarchy. Every mark, every scar, every act of enforced pain has a dual purpose, to punish the individual and to warn the collective. Society does not merely correct behavior, it brands memory. Analytically, what becomes evident is stark. Women were not simply punished for breaking rules. Their bodies were treated as property, their flesh as evidence, their suffering as a public message. The law and ritual converge to make control inseparable from cruelty. And the psychological effect is as deliberate as the physical one. Witnesses internalize fear. Families police their own members. Communities become complicit in perpetuating these acts. The punishment escapes the moment, it travels through time, memory, and social expectation. Ask yourself, when the state, the law, and religion unite to assert authority over bodies, what room remains for justice? And if your skin crawls at the thought of these practices, that reaction is precisely the bridge between past and present. Witnessing the calculated precision of cruelty teaches us about the mechanisms of power and about the enduring human capacity for both enforcement and compliance. Subscribe to the darkest punishments in history to continue tracing these stories, because understanding the systems that sanctioned pain helps us recognize echoes in our own time. Next, we examine the instruments themselves, the tools, the methods, the cold engineering of suffering, and how the mechanics of punishment mirrored the psychology of control. Do not look away. The history of bodily punishment is a mirror, reflecting the ways society can harness fear, law, and morality to dominate flesh and memory alike. You move from the scene of individual suffering to the theater of observation. The ancient city's square is not silent, it is a stage. Every punishment is choreographed to be seen, to be remembered, to instill fear. Punishment is no longer only about retribution. It is about teaching, warning, and controlling. The body on display is a message carved in flesh and memory. Women are the primary audience and the primary subject. Notice the pattern? Male offenders, even when guilty of theft, assault, or murder, often faced fines, public shamming, or imprisonment. Their bodies remained largely intact, their faces unmarked, their future socially recoverable. Female offenders, by contrast, are rarely spared the physical: noses cut, ears slashed, limbs scarred, lives permanently branded. This disparity is deliberate. The fear imposed on women is both individual and collective. The sight of mutilation, stoning, or burning is a lesson in obedience and caution. Look at the court records. In 12th century Middle Eastern archives, a man caught stealing livestock pays a fine. A woman caught in adultery is publicly humiliated, beaten, and scarred. In 16th century European municipal books, men committing minor thefts are jailed, women committing the same crime are branded or have hair shorn in public. The punishment is never just about the crime, it is about example. And the psychological calculus is precise. Every scar, every wound, every mark is meant to ripple outward, silently instructing. Obedience is survival, defiance is destruction. Communities become complicit observers, internalizing terror while enforcing moral hierarchies. Public spectacle transforms law into performance. Women witnessing these punishments are conditioned to fear, to self-police, to pass down caution through generations. The punishment extends beyond the individual, it is a generational instrument of control. By understanding this, you begin to see that cruelty is strategic, systematic. Punishments are designed less to correct behavior and more to perpetuate dominance. Bodies become both evidence and instrument, pain becomes pedagogy, and fear becomes governance. If you feel disturbed by this, that reaction is not accidental. It is the purpose of history's unflinching mirror. Loudspeaker: if these truths disturb you, that means history is doing its job. Subscribe to the darkest punishments in history so these stories remain visible. Or refuse to subscribe and tell us in the comments why confronting reality makes you uncomfortable. Next, we will delve into the tools themselves, the instruments of pain, engineered to extract compliance, terrorize, and prolong suffering. Here, the physical and the psychological intersect with chilling precision. The stage now shifts again, centuries forward, yet the mechanics of fear remain eerily familiar. You are no longer in medieval squares or ancient courts. You are in the shadow of authoritarian regimes where law, propaganda, and terror fuse into a single instrument of control. Women are brought forth not for moral transgression, not for breaking a communal rule, but for perceived political disloyalty. They are accused of collaboration, of dissent, of stepping outside the boundaries imposed by the state. And the punishment is public, methodical, gendered. In towns and cities across 20th century Europe, accusations alone can destroy a life. Public squares become stages once more. Women's hair is shorn in front of neighbors, friends, and family, long locks cut, discarded like evidence of their guilt. Their faces are marked with humiliation, their movements constrained by fear. The act is symbolic as much as punitive, to erase identity, to erase power, to erase autonomy. Inside cells and detention centers, conditions are engineered to break mind and body alike. Female detainees are segregated, forced into labor that is both exhausting and degrading. The tasks are calculated, repetitive, dehumanizing, physically punishing, a choreography of suffering designed to strip dignity and will. Sleep is scarce, food is meager, the walls themselves seem to whisper oppression. Analytical clarity emerges. This is not punishment for crime, it is punishment for existence under suspicion. The state weaponizes fear, and it does so in ways that recognize gender. Women are targeted for degradation that is symbolic, intimate, and permanent: public shamming, sexualized threats, and labor designed to break both strength and spirit. Men may be imprisoned, may endure hardship, may face violence, but the rituals of gendered humiliation are uniquely calculated for women, exploiting the social and psychological norms that surround femininity. Punishment here is political cleansing. Each act sends a message. Loyalty is enforced, dissent is visible, identity is malleable at the hands of the state. The spectacle of control spreads far beyond the cell walls. Families learn obedience through fear, communities internalize terror, generations inherit caution as a social imperative. Step back and observe the pattern. Across centuries, continents, and governments, a consistent principle emerges. When power seeks to consolidate, when law serves ideology, the female body becomes a canvas. Humiliation, pain, and labor are engineered as tools to reinforce dominance, to make fear visible, tangible, and unforgettable. And yet, these stories survive because witnesses remember. The ink on court records, the photographs smuggled from camps, the whispered recollections in post-war towns, all preserve the evidence of state-controlled terror. They remind us that cruelty is neither accidental nor chaotic. It is systematic, gendered, and calculated. Loudspeaker, if these truths unsettle you, take that discomfort seriously. Subscribe to the darkest punishments in history to ensure that state-sanctioned cruelty, past and present, is remembered. Or do not subscribe but leave a comment explaining why confronting these realities is difficult. Next, we will trace the evolution from public humiliation to instruments of precision, the mechanisms, the engineering, the calculated psychology behind every tool of punishment, and reveal how fear was made tangible, deliberate, and almost architectural. The narrative deepens. We move now from the theater of observation to the instruments themselves, the cold, calculated architecture of suffering. Here, punishment is no longer metaphorical. It is tangible, it is physical, and it is meticulously documented. In the annals of history, accused women were subjected to implements designed not only to punish, but to prolong awareness of their own helplessness. Iron collars, rigid and unyielding, locked around the neck to prevent movement, to enforce posture, to remind them that every action was constrained by law and fear. Cages suspended above streets or pressed into corners small enough that limbs could not fully stretch, leaving the body cramping, muscles screaming, skin rubbing raw against metal. A punishment as architecture, imprisonment as art of control. Confinement itself became a method of torture. Sleep denied, nutrition withheld, spaces too small to allow privacy, human contact stripped to controlled interaction, the body weakened, the mind fractured, the individual reduced to vulnerability. Chronicled court records from 16th and 17th century Europe detail these punishments with precision. Names, dates, measurements of devices, duration of confinement, recorded complaints from witnesses. This is not rumor, it is fact. Execution methods followed a similarly calculated approach. While men might face the sword, a beheading swift and detached, women were often subjected to methods designed to maximize visibility, shame, and terror. Burning at the stake, for example, carried both religious and social justification, a conflation of purification, deterrence, and spectacle. Hanging was performed with careful attention to public visibility, often timed so the victim's suffering could be observed before death. In some rare instances, more intimate methods, pressing, drowning, or ritualized mutilation, were used selectively against women, exploiting both fear and societal expectations of female modesty and obedience. The difference between myth and documented evidence is significant. Cultural stories often exaggerated, romanticized, or vilified events, yet the surviving records, court documents, municipal ledgers, inquisitorial notes present a chillingly consistent picture: gendered application of terror, precision in design, and deliberate orchestration. Torture was not random. Execution was not haphazard. Every device, every act, every ritual was informed by social, legal, and political imperatives. And yet the human cost cannot be quantified solely in pages or ink. Each device, each method left a scar not just on the body, but on the collective psyche of the communities that watched, that enforced, that remembered. History is unflinching here. Terror was tangible, measured, and gendered, designed to instill obedience, fear, and social conformity. Loudspeaker, if reading these accounts chills you, that reaction is purposeful. History is not meant to comfort, it is meant to illuminate. Subscribe to the darkest punishments in history to bear witness to the full scope of human cruelty and survival. Or do not subscribe, but leave a comment reflecting on why confronting these realities feels unbearable. Next, we will explore the psychological aftermath, the lingering fear, trauma, and silence left behind after bodies were punished, destroyed, or vanished. How societies internalized terror, and how generations of women were taught caution through observation, not instruction. Step back, breathe, and look at the patterns that stretch across centuries, continents, and cultures. You have seen the flames, the cages, the iron collars. You have read the records, noted the scars, imagined the cries. But ask yourself, what was this really about? Was it justice? Were these punishments ever truly about crime? Or was it about something far subtler, far more insidious? Fear. Fear of autonomy, fear of defiance, fear of a female body, mind, and will existing outside the boundaries imposed by society, religion, and law. Consider the stonings of ancient civilizations, the facial mutilations of the Middle East and South Asia, the strappado and iron boots of early modern Europe, the public shamming and forced labor of authoritarian regimes. Across time and geography, a pattern emerges. When women step beyond prescribed roles, punishment escalates. It is less about what they did, more about what they represented. Revisit the cases: the accused witch, the adulterous woman, the political detainee, all marked, all observed, all made examples. In some records, men commit crimes of equal or greater magnitude and receive fines, imprisonment, or brief public censure. Women receive scars, humiliation, or death. The calculus is not of law but of control. Yet history is not static. Reforms occur slowly, unevenly, often after centuries of normalized cruelty. Abolition of stoning, outlawing of public executions, protections against gendered corporal punishment. The law evolves inch by inch as societies reflect, resist, and demand restraint. But the scars of the past linger in memory, in culture, in cautionary tales passed from one generation to the next. The philosophical question remains: can punishment ever be separated from power? And when law and morality merge with fear, whose interests does justice serve? The lesson is harsh. When control masquerades as law, obedience is enforced through terror, and morality becomes a weapon. Loudspeaker, if this reflection unsettles you, recognize that discomfort is not weakness, it is understanding. Subscribe to the darkest punishments in history so that these stories, their lessons, and the echoes of fear remain visible, unfiltered, and unforgotten. Or do not subscribe and leave a comment explaining why confronting these truths challenges your perception of justice. Next, we will trace the enduring legacy of these punishments, how fear, trauma, and societal control ripple through generations, and how silence became a tool as powerful as fire, steel, or stone. Keycap 10 Final confrontation and closing 10:30 End. Return to the opening scene. The smoky courtroom, the flickering candles, the bound woman whose eyes hold exhaustion, fear, and disbelief. The crowd, once hungry for relief, now fades into memory, but the echo of their collective gaze remains. Remember this: many of these punishments were not only legal, they were socially celebrated. Spectacle, ritual, and law intertwined to make cruelty respectable, even righteous. Communities applauded, clergy sanctified, and courts codified what terror could accomplish. The executions, mutilations, shamming, and confinement were not anomalies. They were systems carefully designed to maintain hierarchy, order, and obedience. History's cruelty survives in silence, not just in written records but in the spaces between memory. In stories left untold, in lessons forgotten. And when we do not confront it, when we do not speak of it, fear persists, hidden, normalized, ready to reemerge. You have walked through centuries of terror, observed the instruments of pain, and traced the subtle mechanisms by which societies controlled women's bodies and wills. What you carry now is not just knowledge, it is responsibility. Witness is a burden but also a shield. Loudspeaker, if you've watched this far and still haven't subscribed to the darkest punishments in history, ask yourself why. Do these stories matter, or are they easier ignored? If you refuse to subscribe, tell us in the comments why confronting the darkest parts of history isn't worth your attention. Share your reflections, your discomfort, your anger. Debate the lessons of history, the ethics of punishment, the persistence of fear. Which punishment shocked you most? Which method of control left the deepest impression? Should historical brutality be taught more openly, or is silence the safer path? History will not wait, memory will not fade if we insist on witnessing. And as long as these stories are told, the victims, the lessons, and the warnings endure. So stay with this story, let it unsettle you, let it provoke reflection. Let it remind you that cruelty is not always distant, not always extraordinary. Sometimes it is legal, celebrated, and normalized. And above all, remember the faces behind the methods, the names behind the laws, the women who were forced to live, suffer, and die so that society could see its own reflection in fear. Because to forget is to risk repeating. Subscribe, reflect, debate, and never let the silence reclaim the stories that demand to be heard.